Bitcoin to me is money at the end of the day. And that might sound like a simple answer, but money is something that is so fundamental to the way our societies function, as I'm sure you know, as many viewers will also know. It forms the basis of all of our trading and savings and investment. And so when I started noticing a lot of things in the world that seemed very backwards, Bitcoin to me kind of like appears as a solution. So to me, Bitcoin is money, it's a revolution, and it's a solution to many of the problems that we are facing today.
Happy 2024. Welcome to the first episode of the year of the Block Reward podcast. Our guest this week is Zac Guignard. Zac is a fellow Canadian Bitcoiner, a Gen Zer, and an economics student at the University of Victoria in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. We are diving into the Bitcoin generation gap today and having a conversation with Zac about how young people are talking about and thinking about Bitcoin. I think it's a really fascinating subject because the world that university students grew up in is vastly different than the one the middle-aged people like me did. And that sort of means that they have different concerns and fears about the future than we did. And they also have a different way of interacting with and understanding technology because of how normal a lot of these things that might be scary and weird to us old farts. And so I enjoyed hearing Zac's take on a lot of these different subjects. And I was just very impressed by the quality of his ideas and his maturity. And so I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well. I want to thank everyone for tuning in as our first kind of year of the Block Reward wound to a close. We're just ecstatic about the reception so far and the number of people who are taking the time out of their week to tune in and listen. We really hope that the conversations are hitting the mark and creating some value for you. And really excited about a number of the guests that we have lined up over the next couple of months. So be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform that you are following us on. Sure appreciate a positive review if you can take the time to give us one. We're trying to reach as many people as possible with this message because we think it's important. And you can help us by helping us get the word out. And I just want to take one more quick moment to mention the other work that we're doing at Block Rewards. The Block Reward podcast is just one thing that we're doing to support our core effort, which is Block Rewards is a Canadian company dedicated to helping Canadian employers figure out how to incorporate Bitcoin into the way that they think about recruiting and retaining staff. And Bitcoin is a new technology that people are working to or struggling to understand. That's going to be something that changes fast over the coming years. And it's really going to impact the way people are compensated from their employers. We think Bitcoin is strategically something businesses can do to not only be different, but to really get ahead and position themselves to be successful as Bitcoin becomes more and more normalized as money and help their staff understand something by offering the Bitcoin in some form of their recruitment and retention strategies. So you can find out more information about that at our homepage, which is blockrewards.ca. And yeah, thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Zac. All right, welcome to another episode of the Block Reward podcast. Our guest this week is Zac Guignard. Zac is a Gen Zer and a Canadian Bitcoiner. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk to today. Welcome, Zac.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Maybe just as we get started, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how we got here with you being a young Bitcoiner?
Totally. Yeah. So I'm an economics major studying at the University of Victoria. I'm in my fourth year, about to complete my bachelor's of economics. And during my time here, it was about 2 years into my degree when I first discovered Bitcoin during the pandemic in 2020, and I dove right in. I was super mystified and curious about the idea of a decentralized currency that no one could control, and that was limited in supply to 21 million coins. Right away, I could see there was value there because a fundamental driver of value in economics is scarcity, and Bitcoin possesses something we would call absolute scarcity in the digital realm. That's a first. So I was very curious about Bitcoin, and I kind of dove into the rabbit hole from there. And eventually that led me to taking charge of the Bitcoin Club at the University of Victoria, where we focus on just bringing more awareness and Bitcoin education to campus, to students. And I mean, we do a variety of kind of meetups. We do things like educational stuff, social stuff, and we're kind of just like that central hub at the university for all things Bitcoin related. In addition to this, I also write a Bitcoin and economics newsletter. That was sort of my way to get some of my work and thoughts onto paper and share that with the world, because I think Bitcoin content and education in general is super important. And I knew sort of a big motivation behind doing something like that was the fact that I knew that a lot of my family and friends weren't going to be tuning into like a Bitcoin podcast or reading a Bitcoin books. But I figured, if I started writing about this stuff and I showed my passion and my seriousness about this asset, about this kind of new technology, they might take it a little bit more seriously, and they might read my articles and things like that. And then that all kind of culminated, and I am now working with Theya Bitcoin. They are a multi-sig company. They make an app for your iPhone where you can self-custody your Bitcoin using multi-sig, and they hold one of the keys for you, and then you get the other two to experiment how you want with your multi-sig setup. And so I'm leading education with them, doing some writing and doing some live Twitter spaces and things like that.
Very cool. I'm so impressed by all of those accomplishments you've been able to make happen already, and I'm really looking forward to digging into a few. Before we do that, I just want to start by asking this question I'm asking everyone who comes on the show, and Bitcoin is in the eye of the beholder and has an appeal to different people in different ways. And in your way of looking at it, what is Bitcoin?
That's a great question, Scott. I mean, Bitcoin to me is money at the end of the day. And that might sound like a simple answer, but money is something that is so fundamental to the way our societies function, as I'm sure you know, as many viewers will also know. It forms the basis of all of our trading and savings and investment. And so when I started noticing a lot of things in the world that seemed very backwards, Bitcoin to me kind of like appears this solution. So to me, Bitcoin is money. It's a revolution, and it's a solution to many of the problems that we are facing today.
Love it. I think it's so interesting that somebody like you is paying attention to this stuff while you're in university. You're spending your time at a place where people are going to be there all day to learn and think about the world. And I'd love to start there and just talk a little bit about Bitcoin on campus. And we'll get to the Bitcoin Club in a second, but just generally speaking, in terms of your impression, or if people must kind of know around campus that you're the Bitcoin guy, Bitcoiner. What is the average university student? What's your take on what their impression of Bitcoin is?
One advantage that my generation and the people I'm going to school with right now have in terms of like Bitcoin adoption is the fact that they've grown up in a very digitally native way. So most people my age experienced and witnessed the growth of some of the largest tech monopolies that we have today, like the Apples and the Googles, and we've watched the launch of every social media, from Instagram to Facebook to TikTok. I mean, even Bitcoin, for example, in 2009 came to life. All of these massive technological advancements and digital revolutions of various things in our lives. So I think from that perspective, students are very open to the idea of digital money. Like it's not, you don't get any of that, it's digital, so it's not real. Like digital things to us are very much real. It's a very much normal part of life. So from that angle, it's a really easy entry point, but really it comes down to education and awareness about it. The average student is open-minded and they're curious about it, and they've heard about Bitcoin, but they still they haven't, taken that leap and truly studied it much or thought much beyond it and outside of it, kind of, some narratives that get formed in media, Bitcoin is bad for the environment, Bitcoin is this or that, there's definitely some misconceptions. So we do spend a lot of time kind of clearing through those and then explaining the basics of Bitcoin. But really in the average student's mind, I think they're very open-minded and they're very curious to learn more about Bitcoin. But I think they just need a place where they can do that and, be provided with resources and guidance, because as much as it's a simple technology, it's also very novel. And so it'll take a little bit of time for students to fully come around on that.
Yeah. Bitcoin itself is a neutral technology, but it can be viewed sometimes as being more identified with conservative values or those who may be more interested in and may have those values. It could be. And universities, particularly in Canada, obviously tend to be sort of incubators for more leftist type thinking. Do you find that's a big sort of general obstacle, or how does Bitcoin, how do you present Bitcoin ideas while disarming this kind of, unnecessary worry about what Bitcoin's political motivations are?
Yeah, totally. So for starters, I completely agree with what you said. Like, I think when you're in the community and you're interacting with Bitcoiners in general, I think you do sort of notice a slight right bias or tendency among its constituents. In terms of what I see from students, I actually find that to be pretty much non-existent. Most people haven't not identified Bitcoin at all with any political stance or party or anything like that quite yet. And that, I think, mostly stems from the fact that they don't necessarily understand it a lot. I think it's really obvious it might become more obvious when you're involved in the community that there might be, like a little bit of a political lean to it. But like you said, Bitcoin is truly neutral money for everyone, right? It doesn't matter what kind of politics you agree with. So I think in terms of like where the students are and not having attached any sort of like political ideology to Bitcoin yet is a really wonderful place to be, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin is not political as much as it may become politicized in our political systems. At the end of the day, we do have to remember that it is neutral money for everybody. And that's something that I always try to reinforce that idea and remind people that, because I don't know about yourself, but I grew up a bit more left-leaning, I would say, center-left. And after discovering Bitcoin, I would say I kind of fell back more into just like right down in the center. But more than anything, I've just become less political. I've come to this point where I'm not relying on our elected officials to solve the problems that we are seeing in the world today. I'm taking more matters into my own hands and putting my thought, my energy, my weight, and my time behind technologies like Bitcoin that I think that can actually address the issues we're seeing, right?
So I grew up in Alberta, for Canadian listeners, so I think I sort of came up in the opposite end of the spectrum, but I completely agree with you. I think that governments have become sort of hopelessly intertwined with the fiat system and the broken incentive mechanisms that result. And at this point, I'm still surprised how many people who are in Bitcoin think that an election resulting in their team winning the outcome is going to produce some kind of a favorable. The systems entirely, I think, need to be redesigned. And I believe Bitcoin is the thing that's going to enable that sort of transition to something that is more fair and representative for everybody. University faculties themselves have actually be shifted to the left. There was sort of a change in the late 60s where the percentage of left versus right-leaning professors that were getting tenured started to skew to the left. And it's certainly true in economics. I find this really interesting thing, because when you start reading Bitcoin books, the economics of Bitcoin are based around something called, Austrian economics, which does kind of run opposite to a lot of what is considered, or maybe what is taught in economics, university economics classes. These are the kind of ideas around inflating the money supply, social spending, etc. Without outing anybody, you don't need to name names, but I'm fascinated by, you're an econ student at a major university. Do you think your professors understand Bitcoin?
No. Short answer, no. And that's mostly, again, due to not having taken the time to understand it at all. I think we're at this weird point where everyone has heard of Bitcoin, but really like a very small percentage have taken that time to truly understand this technology and understand its nature. And that results in kind of Bitcoin becoming this super misunderstood technology. But to go back to what you were saying before, like I completely, I see it myself, like in my econ classes and with the professors that I've had. It actually wasn't until my fourth year, this last semester, the first time I ever had an econ prof mention the words Austrian economics. So like, they are, classes are, I wouldn't say it's like, completely Keynesian, but like the idea of like neoliberal economics, kind of just focusing on the laws of supply and demand and how that affects things. But there is definitely like a lean towards Keynesian economics over something like Austrian economics, and to the point where basically they don't really teach you Austrian economics at all, which I think is a massive oversight. Because a lot of people, what they don't realize is that economics isn't like it's not a hard science, and there isn't really a lot of like settled facts within economics. In fact, what's really happening is you have different schools of economics all kind of competing against each other with different theories and models. And my view, having kind of first studied university economics and then kind of diving into Austrian economics in my free time, is that Austrian economics has a lot more, I think it's more grounded in reality, and like it just intuitively makes more sense than all these kind of like loops and jumps that Keynesian economics kind of employs to make things work and to make it understand, and the assumptions that are needed in these situations. And so, yeah, for the most part, when I've talked to faculty in terms of like professors and things like that about Bitcoin, they usually are very, very skeptical. I've had them say things like, oh, but you have to manage a password, so it's just not going to work. People can't manage passwords, they're going to lose their Bitcoin. Very elementary concerns that are like, well, but managing your password, managing your seed phrase is what that level of responsibility is what empowers users of Bitcoin and unlocks the full potential of this asset, right? So, very, very surface arguments and things like that just show that they haven't taken the time to look into this fully. And really, ultimately, I kind of just see Bitcoin kind of blindsiding them, right? Like they're teaching this thing and they've built their careers around specific things that they've done and contributions that they've made and their teachings. And Bitcoin comes in and it kind of obliterates so many of the things that, Keynesian economics has been saying and they've been teaching and they've been studying and working on. So I can understand how there's a bit of hesitancy, right? And, I think that will kind of go away as Bitcoin continues to proliferate more on the global economy and on the global stage. But it's definitely a bit of a hurdle right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like this idea that the pyramids in Egypt might actually be way older than a lot of historians have thought they were, but there's almost no appetite to investigate that theory because of the number of people whose careers would be discredited as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make a really great point, and going back to one point before, this idea of how we're at this funny point in time where just about everybody, unless you've been living under a rock, has heard the word Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an incredible brand, considering there's no marketing team behind it, but very few people have really still looked closely at it and tried to understand what it is and what it means. And this is true for financial services professionals, and it's true for academics. And yeah, so 20 years from now, I would say the likelihood that there are entire courses devoted to Bitcoin in university, if universities still exist in the same way, that's probably going to happen. So we're in this weird time where you'll be able to tell 20-year-olds when you're my age that there wasn't even a class on Bitcoin when you were in university. It's a pretty weird thing to think about. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Bitcoin Club at U, Vic. I'm really interested in this. I'd just love to hear a little bit more about it.
Totally, yeah. So I've been running the club as president for about a year and a half now, I believe. It kind of seemed like a natural next step for me after I had dove down the rabbit hole and felt like I'd gained a strong enough grasp about Bitcoin and its fundamentals. And, Bitcoin kind of just invokes like a very large amount of passion in individuals. And we see this all around the community. Like people very much evangelize Bitcoin because they're so passionate about it. And it's something I love, right? And so I sort of went through the same experience where I learned about it and was just like, all these connections went off in my brain and it felt like I discovered fire or something like that, like it's totally crazy. And so that really inspired me to want to bring Bitcoin awareness to my friends, to my family, and that's sort of how it started. And then I realized, I could take this a step further, and I could actually, set up a student body on campus and have a place where students can learn about Bitcoin and come to us with questions about this new technology and stuff like that. So it's been about a year and a half now where I've been running the club. We're a pretty small team right now, about 6 of us, but we've been doing what we can. We host regular meetups. So about every second week, we'll host an educational or a social meetup. So sometimes we'll cover various topics, just like Bitcoin basics or, debunking Bitcoin myths or talking about Bitcoin and the environment and helping like clarify a lot of things that, traditional media might have muddied the water a little bit, where people have misconceptions, stuff like that. And then we also do social meetups where, we just meet up for some food and drinks and we just have a good time. We chat, we talk about the economy, we talk about investing, we talk about Bitcoin. And yeah, so it's been a really rewarding experience getting to kind of like bring Bitcoin awareness to my campus. And, just the connections and the acquaintances I've made and the conversations I've had it's been a really awesome journey.
Very cool. We run a local Bitcoin meetup where I live in Kelowna. That's also sort of small and budding. And I imagine that a Bitcoin meetup university would be probably very similar, just with beer pong. But are you guys in touch with are there Bitcoin groups like this at other universities that you're aware of? Or is this thing unique to you, Vic, and you guys? Or
That's a great question, Scott. Actually, so this is sort of a new project I'm also working on that I didn't mention before, but basically myself and other Gen Z Bitcoiners who are in the university space have actually come together. And right now we are working on something called the Bitcoin Student Network. And basically the idea is to have sort of an umbrella brand that connects Bitcoin clubs across the world. And have a way to provide resources and to provide, industry speakers and things like that to these clubs around the world, help them get going and sort of help them get off the ground, get interest going, have people who can come to meetups and speak with them, provide resources for Bitcoin related events and stuff like that. And so that's something that I and a couple other younger Bitcoiners are currently working on, which is a really fun project.
That's really exciting. Yeah, that's really exciting. I have this thought of there's that meme that goes around on Bitcoin Twitter a lot, and it's the dude who's in the back corner of the party room thinking some thought in his head, and it's like there must be a lot of scenarios where it's like this. They don't know what I know about Bitcoin or something like this. What are the if you're when you're talking to kind of fellow students and people your age, what are the one or two or three things that you find are the most effective way? Like, is there a way that you kind of talk about Bitcoin to make it make sense for people when you're trying to do that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say my sort of go-to way to do this is really to meeting people where they're at. So learning something about somebody, kind of understanding, what are the issues that they're worried about in the world today? What do they care about? And kind of approaching Bitcoin from that angle. Because Bitcoin is a very multifaceted technology, and it kind of touches on a lot of different areas of life. And as kind of we were chatting before, Generation Z, there is like a prevailing sense of kind of hopelessness in the face of a lot of global challenges that we're facing right now. And I'm not environmental issues, whether that's environmental destruction or climate change or just pollution in general, or you have social issues, or you have issues with human rights, or you're having economic issues like the inflation or the high levels of debt and the wealth inequality and all these different things. And we're bombarded with this constantly through legacy media. And it's really curated this, I know people who truly think the world is not going to last past our lifetimes. And it's sort of really scary to see this kind of perception of hopelessness. So I usually kind of try to meet people where they're at, see what they care about, learn a bit about them, and then kind of dive into how Bitcoin can help them address the things that they care about personally, but also how Bitcoin can help us advance on a societal level and towards the goals that we have and the problems we're facing.
Yeah, it's tragic that I think even things like I talk often with friends of mine. I have a casual kind of interest in what's happening in the AI space, and I can't imagine what it would mean for someone who's finishing up post-secondary studies and thinking about entering the workplace and watching this technology simultaneously evolve at a rate that is just frightening. So to just maybe dig a little bit deeper on that first point you made about lack of optimism around the future, what do you tell people about Bitcoin and how you think it could change that?
Yeah, I often come at it like a lot of these fears are environmental fears. The severity of a changing climate has really impacted at least the students that I meet at my university. And this idea that basically, the world is going to end at some point in our lifetimes because of human-induced pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And so I usually kind of address that the side of Bitcoin that relates to the environment, because a lot of people have very serious environmental concerns. So I like to talk about, the Bitcoin's ability to kind of bring about like a sustainable energy revolution, help help build out renewable energy, more clean energy, its ability to mitigate wasted and stranded energy from flared gas or vented methane, landfills leaking methane, things like that. Its ability to ultimately bring about systemic change, right? Because I don't think we're going to solve a lot of these issues from the systems that we currently have and the institutions we currently have. In fact, I would argue these systems and institutions are the reasons we're facing these problems in the first place. And I do believe that we need systemic change if we're going to address really the social, the environmental, and the economic problems that we're facing today. So, the idea that Bitcoin can bring about systemic change and bring forward a new monetary order and a new monetary system that's more fair and more equal, and all these other pieces where, how Bitcoin relates to energy and the environment. And then also, of course, like economic problems, like lots of folks in my generation think they'll never be able to afford a home, or, the idea of inflation hasn't fully grasp them yet. When you live in a Western democracy that has relatively stable currencies compared to other places in the world, inflation doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But when we start seeing higher levels of inflation, I think people are really going to start being more concerned about that too. So I always Bitcoin, Bitcoin fixes inflation, Bitcoin doesn't have inflation, that kind of thing. Like those sorts of points are I think are kind of help people see how Bitcoin can bring about positive change in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that's unique to people in a certain generation. I would say certainly most people my age, while they're upset about inflation, it's still so just poorly understood the mechanisms of how it works and where it's going. So have you ever had anyone, the things you're talking about there, it takes a fair amount of study to wrap your mind around those concepts and to be able to even get there. Have you ever had a situation where somebody who's sort of really concerned about climate stuff is unwilling to even hear it because they've already decided, made up an opinion about Bitcoin without really knowing why any of those points you made might make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some very, I guess we could just say, kind of extreme opinions. As with any topic, there are kind of extremists on every side, and I think there's definitely some people I've met that because Bitcoin uses energy, therefore it is bad for the environment, which, once you've done more than maybe like 5 to 10 hours of studying and learning how Bitcoin interacts with energy, and, also considering the environmental impact of our current systems and like the traditional financial system and the banks and how they're tied to the fossil fuels and all of these other things. I mean, I think the blame is totally misplaced, right? Bitcoin is a new technology. And it is incentivizing renewables. It is mitigating emissions from stranded energy. It is promoting systemic change that can bring forth a decrease in consumerism and the idea of infinite growth. And overall, this technology has been responsible for 0% of the environmental damage over the past century. And yet it's taking pretty much like an outsized level of blame. We have people like I think it was the IMF or the World Economic Forum who claimed it would consume all the energy in the world by 2020. And then meanwhile, we have a traditional financial system. The traditional financial system itself, arguably a main driver of the environmental destruction that we've seen, maintain significant ties to fossil fuels, funneling billions of dollars in when they claim they're not or whatever. And yet it seems to just be getting off scot-free. So I think it's kind of just a situation where people aren't, they're misplacing the blame on something that really has no real environmental impact, right? Like Bitcoin mining is a entirely electric process. It does not emit any emissions at all. It all depends on the source of energy used. So like if you think Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment, you must also think electric cars are bad for the environment, or really anything that uses electricity.
Yeah, or things that are a lot less valuable to society than providing fair money for everyone. Like YouTube uses significantly more electricity than Bitcoin is. And I'm pretty sure that if we were to try to stack up the existentials or contribution to society of the two side by side, I'm fairly comfortable that Bitcoin would come out pretty good in that comparison. I don't blame people for being confused about this stuff from the environmental perspective, especially people your own age. I think about things like Greenpeace has accepted basically a bribe from a cryptocurrency company called Ripple and engaged in an entirely disingenuous mismarketing campaign to slap Bitcoin with a number of different just untrue stereotypes. And the brand Greenpeace itself, I think, still carries a lot of weight. And I could be off on that, but Yeah, so it's really sad to see. You mentioned infinite growth, which is is an intrinsic component of the way the financial and banking system works now. The idea of everything, the price of everything needs to go forever, or essentially everything is going to collapse because of the amount of money that everybody owes. But that same force is what's causing the bleak future financially in terms of people your age thinking about maybe one day owning a house. And that must be a really interesting conversation to have with people your age.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, even just like, well, that's the thing about Bitcoin, right? Like I spent about 2 years studying what we'll just call university economics before I discovered Bitcoin and started learning a new kind of economics and realizing that a lot of the assumptions I had made were simply wrong. You know, when they're teaching you economics at university, you don't really talk about the money that you used. It's sort of just assumed as a given. And not a lot of time is really dedicated to thinking about these sort of like fundamental concepts, like why does the money supply need to expand? Why do we need inflation? Like these are just assumed, right? Like it's totally like 2% inflation. Like that's just a bullet point on the slide assumption for the rest of your 4 years in economics. And there's no like examination given to that or thoughts on like, you know, like how is that true? And when you realize that, I mean, to be fair, in the way the current financial system works, you do need inflation because the government needs to be able to service its debt, and it can't do that if there's deflation. So in the way our monetary system works, it's an inflationary monetary system. It just inherently does need these things. But you can have a different kind of monetary system, a new monetary system built on Bitcoin, a deflationary monetary system. And these things actually can work. The problem is you know, it's kind of like the idea that I think Jeff Booth popularized, just like you can't imagine how the system is going to work from within the system we're already in, right? So kind of countering a lot of those ideas of like, you know, inflation versus deflation and the continuous need for growth and for that constantly growing money supply, and realizing that these assumptions aren't necessarily true and exploring what the possibilities beyond these assumptions are. And I think Bitcoin kind of like reinvigorates these questions and reinvigorates these ideas in economics, and ultimately will kind of, from what I can tell, and in my opinion, will prove these concepts true, which I think is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, one of my favorite Saved Dean quotes is, if we've just accepted it point blank that 2% inflation is better than 0%, why is 4% not better than 2? And it's just, you know, it's just a funny way of making light of the absurdity that we don't even examine the sort of fundamental mechanisms. And this is happening. It's not like this is unique to university economics. Like if you're looking at the headlines of the Globe and Mail and financial news, they're just talking about, you know, there's a lot of conversation about whether or not or when we're going to get back to target inflation, and nobody's talking about whether or not we should. That's what we should even be trying to do. So. It is just an absurd part of the system. And I absolutely agree with what Jeff says about evaluating the system from inside the system is just almost impossible. You mentioned there kind of the idea of transitioning towards a deflation, and you wrote a really good article I saw in your Substack in the summer about the idea of Bitcoin sort of triggering the price of everything else coming down. Maybe just give me a 2-minute overview of that idea and a summary of that article. It was worth a read.
Yeah, totally. I mean, basically, it's the idea that Bitcoin is the superior store of value asset, and not the whole world has not recognized that. In fact, a very small subset of the population have recognized that Bitcoin possesses the monetary characteristics that make it the best store of value asset we've ever discovered. And then on the flip side of that, you have assets, whether we're talking about equity or real estate or even gold, bonds, everything that have been massively inflated by decades of monetary stimulus, especially the last, 10, 15 years since 2008, since it's just been QE for a decade plus until about now. You have these massive inflated asset bubbles all around the world. So in the article, I kind of lay out the assumption, like, if we assume that Bitcoin is what we say it is this superior store of value asset, and we consider the amount of money that is out in the world in other assets, it's safe to assume that as Bitcoin continues to evolve and grow and gets more investors, it's going to suck value from these other asset classes, from real estate, from stocks, because these things are highly inflated. And why are they inflated? And that's because people are looking for a way to preserve their wealth, right? With inflation, if you have 2% inflation, you're losing 2% of your money every year. And, realistically, that's not an accurate measure of how much the money supply is growing. It's actually growing around 7% per annum. So, if you're losing 7% of your total net worth every year, you need to invest that. You need to put that somewhere. And so the fact that our money has inflation, it doesn't act as a store of value, means that people need to put their capital to use elsewhere to preserve their purchasing power. And that has resulted in people piling into things like real estate and stocks and massively inflating their valuation beyond what their fair value is, so that they now have something called a monetary premium. So in the article, I basically lay out how Bitcoin as a superior store of value will sort of absorb monetary premium from other assets.
Yeah, I would think for people your age who are feeling bleak about their financial prospects for the future, this would be a great way for them to start thinking about why Bitcoin is a good idea. And it's no different for people who are a little bit older and just as equally frustrated by the price of everything else. So I love this concept, and I think it makes a ton of sense. I mean, for me personally, and we'll include in the post show notes sort of a link to your Substack so people can find that if they want to read it. Let's talk a little bit about Theya. I think it's really interesting that you've sort of found yourself some Bitcoin industry work while you're also pursuing your studies. How did that come about?
Yeah, I kind of owe it to just the proof of work I was doing on Twitter and with my Substack, really. Like I was saying, Bitcoin invoked a lot of passion in me and made me want to put my energy and time behind it. So, I kind of started off, I never was a big Twitter user. I had a Twitter account, and I heard, my friend told me that that's like where the Bitcoin community was. And then I had no idea. So I started going on Twitter and I started tweeting about Bitcoin. Eventually you get into like those Bitcoin circles and in the Bitcoin algorithm on Twitter. And I started, I was just tweeting my thoughts about the economy, about Bitcoin, started getting some followers, eventually got to a point where I was like, okay, so people are kind of enjoying what I have to say. What if I take this the next step and I start like writing longer form articles on my thoughts about Bitcoin and its intersection with economics? Earlier this year, I started writing the Substack. And at the time was sort of thinking to myself, I'm coming close to graduation. I've been studying economics. Like Bitcoin is something I'm super interested in. I'm passionate about, and I've gained a large knowledge set around. So it became something where I was kind of like, well, I don't really want to work, in the traditional financial system or for a bank or for the government or something like that, which is a really common pathway for people who have been studying economics. I think that's like, like the university is sort of just like churning out economists for the government and the banks. To use and reinforce all their stuff. So I sort of was like, I would like to work in Bitcoin. And so I just kept putting my work out there and making as many connections as I can. And eventually actually, Smeet, who is one of the co-founders of Theya, reached out to me and we hopped on a couple calls and we kind of just got talking. And so they're a relatively small company. They just launched on the App Store. We're a pretty small team right now. But he basically invited me onto the team to help out steering like the education side of things. And I felt, that was something that not only was a good chance to get some experience in the Bitcoin industry, but also something I'm very interested in, just because I love to talk about Bitcoin. I love to write about Bitcoin. So why not help a Bitcoin company, build their brand and get that awareness and stuff.
That's so cool. When you were talking a little bit about Theya at the outset of the show, you used a few terms that would probably be new for at least listeners of this show, as it's kind of a for beginners podcast. Maybe take a stab at explaining what multi-sig is for somebody who really doesn't know much about how Bitcoin wallets work.
Totally. Yeah. So to keep it as simple as I can, I'll start by explaining what single signature is. And basically that single signature would be like if you have a hardware device like a Blockstream Jade or a Ledger or something like that. And so your Bitcoin wallet has one private key for it. So what multi-sig is basically, instead of just having that one private key to access your wallet, you can set up a quorum of a certain amount of keys to be able to access a wallet. So for example, at Theya, we offer a 2 of 3 multi-sig quorum. And so what that means is basically there are 3 keys associated with your wallet. At any time, you would need 2 of them to access and spend the Bitcoin. So how Theya functions is they hold one of the keys, and then you are given the other 2 keys to disperse amongst. You can have them yourself, or you could give a key to a friend, or you could dedicate it to a different hardware device in a different geographical location. There's lots of ways to kind of customize your multi-sig setup. But the main thing is that it enhances the security, because now you don't have a single point of failure. So with a single signature Bitcoin wallet, if you lost your private key, you risk losing your Bitcoin forever, right? Because those are the keys. If your wallet malfunctioned after that, you wouldn't have access to your Bitcoin. But if you set up a multi-sig, with a collaborative custody, like with a company like Theya, if you ever lose one of your keys, it's okay, because now, let's say you gave one to a friend, your friend has a key and Theya still holds a key. So they're able to recover your funds for you. So you are dispersing the risk of theft or loss, basically, and having sort of like a backup through a level of trust with this company and with friends or family or wherever you decide to do with the other key.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are trying to start learning about Bitcoin, custody, taking possession of your own financial assets is a really different idea, especially for people who are older. And it is clunky right now. I think it has some risk and a lot of room to be improved. And this multi-sig idea is something that I think has a ton of legs and a bright future. How does it work for people who are listening? So does this service cost a fee or?
Yeah, so Theya offers multiple different ways that you can set up the multi-sig. But if you consider the main one for beginners and people coming to the app will be the suggestion to have a 2 of 3 multi-sig where Theya holds one of the keys. And there would be it's sort of like, you can think of it as sort of a subscription. But what really is cool about this is that Theya operates all through a mobile app. So it really the UX, and it really streamlined the design and the interaction with your Bitcoin and stuff like that. So it's a very user-friendly experience.
Cool. Yeah. No, I think, everybody pays fees to their bank all the time, and you have no say on those things. So the idea that you might have to pay for something that's going to give you some peace of mind in terms of how easy it is and how safe it is to store your Bitcoin is something that, to me, that makes a lot of sense. So what exactly do you do for them? You're doing some promotional stuff, writing?
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm sort of just steering the education side of things, but the job has been a little multifaceted so far. So I do some writing, kind of doing resources and guides, covering basic concepts, some technical stuff, some economic stuff. But I'm also doing a lot of kind of more analyst stuff where, I always gotta be keeping up to date with, the main events in the economy, what's, macro talk. And we've actually been hosting a live Twitter Spaces every Wednesday at 2 p.m. East Pacific time called the West Coast Bitcoin Bulls. And we get on there and I get on there as a speaker, and, we chat macro, we chat Bitcoin. We've had a lot of really great speakers and guests so far. So yeah, I'm just sort of steering a bit of the content education stuff.
Cool. So you mentioned that you're in your last year of your undergrad degree. Where is this going to go from here?
I'm even less than a year now. I literally will be taking my finals in 1 month today. I have my last final exam ever, and then I will have my bachelor's of economics. And then I'm graduating in the spring, but I'll be completed all my my studies. And yeah, basically want to put my time and energy full time into Bitcoin. So yeah, and just basically, getting as much experience in the space as I can, and then connecting with everyone that I can. And I'm really excited to kind of get to just focus fully on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin industry, and bringing Bitcoin to the world, really.
It must be, the flip side, I think about how cool it would be for somebody your age to be just starting their career at a time when it's possible to do this with Bitcoin. Yeah, I think you must have some really interesting ideas. And it's a funny thing about how also, the digital generation. So people your age, you mentioned that you've grown up with all these digital things and it's digitally normal. You guys are also the first generation, or maybe second-ish, that's your entire lives are going to be captured online. So theoretically, somebody could be watching this episode in 20 years and looking at oh, this is when Zac was, hadn't even got started yet. So who knows? Maybe this will turn out to be some kind of something people are looking back on with, fond memories of your early days.
Totally. If no one else is looking, I will be. To look back on these moments and, to see whether that's some podcasts that I did or the writing I was doing when I was, 23 years old. I think it'll be super cool to be able to look back on that, especially as we see Bitcoin grow and the community grow, and just in general, there'll be a lot of fond memories, I think.
Yeah, I want to say, like, I also think it's really cool that somebody your age is sort of stepping forward into a place of leadership. And, Bitcoin, there is no marketing department, and people learn easiest learning from other people. So this idea of what you guys are doing with the Bitcoin Club on campus and building a network and stuff, it's something that other people younger than you are definitely going to pick up and follow. And I think it's just cool to see people your age taking this kind of initiative. And I'm personally excited to watch and see where it ends up for you.
I really appreciate that, Scott. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space. Like it's a fast growing industry. I mean, the halvings in 5 months, who knows where it's going to take us next. So, to all the youngsters out there, if you're interested in finance, economics, and you like technology as well, I feel like Bitcoin is a wonderful place to be.
Very cool. So for people who do want to find more of you on Twitter and your Substack, like, how do they do that?
Yeah, totally. Easiest is to just follow me on Twitter. I've got my username in the handle here on the video. And from there, there's a link to my Substack there. And then in terms of the work I've been doing for Theya, they've got a blog on their website, theya.us/blog, I think it is. So I'll be putting some of my work there. And then we're also going to be going live on Twitter lots. So really, if you're on Twitter, you're following me, you'll get all the updates.
Cool. And if you're listening and you're a Bitcoiner and you're in a university somewhere else, or you're a Bitcoiner with a kid who's a Bitcoiner who's in university somewhere else, get them in touch with Zac, and let's get a Bitcoin meetup happening on every campus in Canada and anywhere else where people might find this pod.
Absolutely. My DMs are open.
Thanks again for coming on, Zac.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Block Reward. We're trying to do something different here, creating accessible conversations meant for people who aren't obsessed with Bitcoin. If you found this episode informative and engaging, hit that subscribe button to make sure you stay updated with future episodes. Your feedback matters. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to share your reviews and help us with our goal of creating Bitcoin content that is simple and easy to understand. Bitcoin has an important role to play in the future of finance. It will change the way we save, spend, and invest. Discover why Bitcoin offers a game-changing opportunity for forward-thinking employers by visiting blockrewards.ca. Block Rewards' mission is helping Canadian employers implement strategies for integrating Bitcoin into compensation and benefits, supercharge your recruitment and retention strategies, and help your team members plan for the rising cost of living by rewarding their work with the hardest money ever invented. Special thanks to our top sponsor, Paramount Employee Benefits Consulting, Canada's only Bitcoin forward benefits and pension advisory. For more information, find them at paramountbenefits.ca. Big shout out to Podigy, our production team that makes all this possible, and BMX Escape for producing our music. Bitcoin is an expansive and dense topic many people walk away from early. To Bitcoin enthusiasts looking for that podcast they can share with friends, family, and colleagues, one they'll actually listen to, we hope that is us. The content of these conversations is meant to be provided for information purposes only. Nothing here is investment advice. Bitcoin is a big topic. Be sure to do your own research before making any personal financial decisions. Thanks for listening.